So, was God talking about the Big Bang in Genesis? This guy seems to think so. What's up guys, today we're going to be talking about some really awkward misapplications of science, but before we do that, fan art. First of all, we have a Snow Day Suris along with My Girlfriend Rez by Baphomet, a Facts and Logic Hammer by Florin B, and then a Jolly Old Suris by German. As always, thank you all for your submissions, and let's get right into the video at hand.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. How you doing?
What we're going to be talking about today is the Big Bang Theory versus the Bible. Here's the teaser, or here's the basic concept. The Big Bang Theory says that 13.8 billion years ago, there was this tiny little microscopic point in space.
We've already hit our very first issue. When you say that there was a tiny microscopic point in space, the lay people in your audience probably hear that and nod along. Problem is, with the Big Bang model, that tiny microscopic point is space. All matter is in that tiny microscopic point. That includes space. The model is not that space is some void that all the matter in that tiny microscopic point filled. If you start out the theory arguing that a microscopic point was in space, you're arguing about something that is before what we know as Planck time. Unfortunately, though, all of our calculations seem to stop at Planck time. It may sound like I'm being pedantic, but you'll notice that he does this oversimplification throughout the entire video in order to construct a really false parallel.
And it generated so much energy, it used Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, and it went bang.
Again, the oversimplification. One, the Big Bang didn't use anything. It didn't use an equation in any way, shape, or form. We retroactively look back at what we see and assume the theory of relativity. You see, when we're talking about the Big Bang model, we have to assume two things. First, we assume the general theory of relativity by Einstein. That's on us. It's not that there was all matter in the universe trying to use that theory beforehand. I know in other episodes I've pointed out that oversimplification can be a really useful tool for teaching children something, but that doesn't seem to be what you're trying to do here. So instead, let's try to be accurate. The other assumption that we have to work with isn't just the theory of relativity, though. We also have to use the cosmological principle. The cosmological principle is that one day a YouTuber named Cosmological may one day actually continue to make videos. Actually, no, that's not the principle. No, the principle states that an observer's view of the universe depends neither on the direction in which he looks nor on his location. This principle applies to any incredibly large-scale property of the universe, but it does imply that the universe has no edge. This distinction is important because earlier you said that the Big Bang concludes that there was a point in space that exploded, but the cosmological principle flies in the face of that. That may sound a little weird, but let me explain. You see, when you marry Einstein's theory of relativity with the cosmological principle, you get an instance where instead of an explosion happening somewhere in space, you instead get a model where the Big Bang happens throughout space at the same time. There is no one minuscule thing in space that explodes. Space itself explodes at the start of time. It's when we use these two assumptions that we are actually able to calculate the origin of the universe, at least up into Planck time. What happened before Planck time is anybody's guess, but assuming knowledge either way is kind of sort of a lie. Anywho, again, it might seem like I'm being pedantic when I'm saying things like this, but it's very, very important to show that when he's oversimplifying things for his audience, he's oversimplifying them to the point where they are actually inaccurate, like how leaving the cosmological principle out of the Big Bang model literally leads you to a completely different conclusion.
And light was created. Light was created 13.8 billion years ago.
Again, that's not exactly what the Big Bang proposes. In fact, when we actually use physics to determine when the first light began, we find that the first light was 240,000 to 300,000 years after the Big Bang. This is known as the Era of Recombination. This is because all of the hot, dense matter that existed at the point of the Big Bang was not quite where it needed to be to form atoms. The universe literally had to cool down for ionized atoms of hydrogen to begin to form, and we don't actually get light light until the fusion process generates photons for gamma radiation. So not only do I have problems with the point of light being created, because again, that's not what any of this says, it's literally assembled, but the math is also just wrong. You're literally 240,000 years off with your 13.8 billion metric.
So light's created here, and then 13.8 billion years later, humans are created.
Again, this created thing. I'm not going to comment on it too much further. I'm just going to let the video roll. There's a point that he gets to that really irks me, though.
So in the Big Bang Theory, the first thing that was created was light.
No, light was not the first thing formed. Hydrogen and helium were. Light came after. If you want to be really a reductionist, we can talk about atoms and quarks, though.
And the last thing created in the universe are human beings.
Wait. Human beings are the last thing that has been generated by the universe? First of all, let's get something straight. There is no answer to what the last created being is, but we know that it's definitely not humans because new species are emerging all the time. Sometimes they are new species that are born through evolution, and sometimes they are older species that we have just simply discovered. Hell, in Lake Victoria alone, more than 500 new species of fish originated in the last 15,000 years. Humans are much older than that. You're going to try to construct some parallels here, but your parallels are constructed entirely on a lie. I know you're using oversimplifications, but you're oversimplifying things to the point where they're basically false.
Okay, so in the Big Bang Theory, you also have the sun. Our sun was created 9.2 billion years after the Big Bang.
You are aware that there are suns in other solar systems that formed before ours, right? That there's not just one sun, there's literally millions of them, and they were formed either later or sooner than ours. Our sun isn't special. Our sun is ours, and that makes it feel special, but it's not special. So basing any metric based solely on when our sun was formed is already going to be a bit incoherent.
So if you take light, go 9.2 billion years, our sun is created, and then 13.8 billion years from light, you have humans being created. If you divide 9.2 into 13.8, you get exactly 2/3.
Okay, and if these things were to have occurred in any other order or in any other parts of time, you would have gotten equally uniformly looking fractions. Granted, I've had the benefit of viewing your video before actually reviewing it here, so I know this isn't your main point. I just know that this one starts building up to your point, not just because there's a lot of other Christians and theists that try to use uniformity of nature as an argument in favor of God.
So the fraction is 2/3 of the way from light to humans, our sun was created. And 2/3, as you know, is equal to 4/6.
Yes. And what is the significance of this, you are so blatantly going to tell me soon?
It's the same fraction. What does the Bible say? Moses writes the book of Genesis about 3,300 years ago.
Okay, well, first of all, most historians agree that Moses didn't exist, so it's going to be kind of weird for a guy who historians agree don't exist to have written the Bible. Modern scholars seem to be leaning on Genesis being written in the 6th and 5th century. Hell, there's actually a theory that Genesis was created later during the imperial authorization of Persia. Persia wanted to grant Jerusalem a large measure of local autonomy within their growing empire, but they had to have the local authorities create a single code of law. As a result, multiple groups that claimed that they could trace their origins back to Moses and Abraham collaborated to smash together the book of Genesis. This is one of the reasons why it seems like there are multiple creation accounts and even multiple flood stories within the text. It's theorized that this was literally because there were rival groups trying to form a single cogent code of law and origins for their people within the Persian Empire. You can find more information on this theory by reading Jean-Louis Ska. I've actually provided the Google Scholar article for it in the description below if you'd like to do some further reading.
And Moses says that light was created on the first day, and he says the last thing created were human beings. Now, of course, Moses uses the term 6 days, and the Big Bang Theory uses billions of years. But the point here is we have two calendars, and both agree on the beginning, and both agree on the end.
Except they don't agree on the beginning and end. Again, the Big Bang Theory does not propose that light was the first thing to be created. There were components that were created beforehand, insofar as you can even use the word created there. On top of that, the Big Bang Theory doesn't actually say anything about humans coming to be. That would be the theory of evolution. So to try to marry the Big Bang Theory and the Bible in this way, by completely bastardizing what it says, is kind of bearing false witness. Moreover, there's this thing that conspiracy theorists like to do. Not saying you are one, just saying you're using the same tactics, where all of the differences between two events or two figures are discarded in favor of only talking about the parallels. When you only talk about the parallels, things start to seem really, really suspicious. But when you start stripping away that first layer and realize that underneath are 1,025 differences, the fact that the two things you're trying to compare have one or two instances in common starts to lose any measure of weight. Hell, there's a really famous example of this that I could bring up right now to show how this conspiracy works. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy both were elected in 46. Just Lincoln was 1846 and Kennedy was 1946. That was to Congress. They were both elected to the presidency in 18 and 1960 respectively. The names Lincoln and Kennedy both contain 7 letters. They both were concerned with civil rights, and both wives lost children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. They both got shot in the head, and Lincoln's secretary, Kennedy, warned him not to go to the theater, while Kennedy's secretary, Lincoln, warned him not to go to Dallas. The parallels go on, but what this ignores is the, again, thousands of different things in their lives that are not parallel, and it also ignores how trivial each of these parallel things are. Like, seriously, 2 people have the same amount of letters in their name? Oh, big deal. They were both shot on a Friday? Again, big deal. I can roll a 6-sided die and I can get 6 every now and again. A 1 in 7 chance isn't that spectacular. But when you try to lump all the parallels on top of another, they sound like they form something cohesive. The problem is they don't. Again, it's completely ignored every single bit of difference between these two individuals and only focused on the parallel. Much like when you try to talk about the biblical creation myth and the Big Bang Theory, you're ignoring thousands of differences between the two narratives to focus on the few parallels. You're grasping at straws.
Moses also does something very interesting to a scientifically minded, logical person like myself.
Creates a narrative that you'll one day use to appease your confirmation bias? Because that seems to be what's happening here.
Wait a minute. When does Moses say that the sun was created? Moses doesn't create the sun on the first day, nor does he on the second day, nor on the third. He waits to the 4th day of a 6-day creation cycle to create our sun, which is 4/6. 4/6 of the way through from light to human beings, the sun is created.
Okay. And Lincoln and Kennedy were both shot on Friday. We're dealing with a very small amount of variables that could be different. It's just for Moses, we've got even fewer days than Lincoln and Kennedy had. This makes your point not only not convincing, but essentially using the same language of a conspiracy theory. It's interesting, and the parallels are neat, but they don't prove anything.
It matches mathematically perfectly with the Big Bang Theory.
No, it doesn't. I've already gone over how you fudged these numbers already. You had to oversimplify all the numbers for the Big Bang Theory to even get these things to look like they meshed.
2/3 equals 4/6, 4/6 equals 2/3. It's the same fraction. So the language of science is mathematics. And mathematically, we've just shown that we have 3 data points that all agree with each other. The Big Bang Theory agrees with the Bible, or wait a minute, does the Bible agree with the Big Bang Theory? And so you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, who came up with the idea that light was created a long time before our sun was created?
Well, I don't think it really much matters. Consider the fact that light would have either been created after the sun or before the sun. You've got a 1 in 2 chance of getting it right. And I don't know about you, but were I a gambler, 50% is very good odds.
Think about this. Moses was raised in Egypt. In Egypt, there are many, many gods, right? However, the greatest and most powerful god is the sun god named Ra.
And you just unironically took the picture of Ra from Smite. You know, I actually live only about an hour away from Hi-Res Studios. I should totally bring this video to their doorstep for funsies. I also got to go to the Hi-Res booth when I was at Anime Week in Atlanta. That was really neat. Anywho, continue on.
And what you're saying to me is, if you believe Moses was writing fiction, What you're saying to me is Moses took a pen and he wrote a book of fiction, and he agrees with the Big Bang Theory perfectly.
Again, not perfectly. You had to fudge all the numbers for the Big Bang Theory in order to get it to even look like it was coherent with the 6-day creation model. You had to ignore every single instance of difference between these two different origin stories and only focus on the parallels to say they're similar. That's like me comparing myself to you only insofar as we have white skin and receding hairlines. While both of these things are true, it ignores the millions of differences that you and I probably both have. For one, I highly doubt you have a micropenis, whereas I'm 100% sure of whether or not I have one.
Not only just in order of the creation, which he gets it pretty much all the way right, but he also mathematically perfectly puts the sun at 2/3 of the way through the creation cycle.
There were no mathematics involved. And again, this is all predicated on who the author was, which it wasn't Moses, so we don't know if the author of Genesis lived in Egypt, so that point doesn't mean anything.
I'm asking my scientifically atheist friends, how did Moses do it?
Because a 1 in 6 chance is really good odds, even 3 times. I've played D&D before. I've played card games. I've gotten through encounters with that exact chance multiple times.
If he was writing a book of fiction, then how did he come up with that? How did he come up with light was created a long time before the sun?
Well, he didn't say a long time. He literally just put a handful of days before the creation of light and the sun. So, I'm not 100% certain if that point means anything of substance. Let's be honest, it really actually doesn't.
Why would anyone 3,300 years ago decide that light was a long time in creation, a long time in existence before our sun was created?
Circumstance. Random chance. He's not really dealing with terribly bad odds. If you're going to make a 6-day creation myth, you've only got so much stuff to shove into the days, and you've only got so many days to work with. If you know that light comes from the sun, but you also want to say that light comes from God, then you're going to put the light coming before the sun. Hell, you could even relate this to Plato's forms if you desperately wanted to make connections, saying that the light is the first form, and the sun is trying to take from that form. But I digress. Realizing that the sun is required for things to live, so you put all the living things outside of water and vegetation somehow ahead of the sun, it seems to me like you would have to make things in roughly that order. But let's talk about some of the things that actually Moses gets wrong. You see, on day 1, God created Earth. It was a watery, formless planet suspended in darkness and void of space with no stars, no sun, moon, or other planets. Then, God created light and separated light from darkness. Now, here's the problem. The sun of our solar system is older than our Earth. So that's already something that the author of Genesis got wrong. On day 2, we have Earth forming an atmosphere, whether you want to call it a firmament, atmospheric water, or whatever young Earth creationist silliness you want to actually use. We get the Earth forming an atmosphere of some variety without an actual sun to create a Goldilocks zone for the formation of an atmosphere to even function. That flies directly in the face of science. That has nothing to do with science. That's just a made-up claim that can't be backed by science, and yet you're saying it fits perfectly into the model. And again, before the sun actually is formed, you have vegetation coming onto the Earth in day 3. But vegetation requires photosynthesis to actually survive, which requires sunlight. And there's no actual sun. That's not until day 4. So why is any of this vegetation here? And then, of course, on day 5 and 6, you've got mammals, land animals, and all that other stuff being formed. You see, when we start looking at the differences between these things, we start finding that the creation myth and the Big Bang Theory are completely incongruent with one another. But to see those incongruencies, you have to actually be looking at both of them in truthfulness, and not just cherry-picking the parts that parallel so that you can create a false narrative. This is really, really dishonest work.
I don't know. It just seems like a question that begs the question, why?
Yeah, I'd like to ask that question as well. Why did you make this video filled with lies, lies, lies? This video is literally the definition of cognitive dissonance. This is either a desperate effort to explain to yourself why you hold two very contradictory positions, or it is an effort to teach your audience how they can hold two very contradictory positions. You're trying to argue that these two things correlate with one another when they don't. There are similarities, like with literally everything that exists. Again, you and I are both white guys with receding hairlines, but that doesn't make us in any meaningful way similar. But I'm not going to leave the verdict of this up to me to decide. I want you guys to decide, so I've done a couple things. One, I'm going to be providing an iCard, if I remember to put it up there. You can see it in the top right corner of the video, and I'm going to be asking the question, is the story in the 6-day creation and the story in the Big Bang Theory the same? Are these two ideas synchronous with one another? Let me know through the iCard vote, and let me know in the comment section below. That said, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, leave me a comment letting me know what you did or didn't like. If you really enjoy what I do, then please share my work with other people, and also let me know by supporting me on Patreon, if you want to, and if you've got the money to. Even $1 a month helps me keep the lights on. But with all that said, I hope you guys have had a wonderful time, and I will see you in the next video. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.